What is going on, Cultiv8 family? I hope you are doing good wherever it is that you're listening to this from today. We're getting into another quite in-depth topic today, which I'm excited to talk about. It's something that affects me a lot. It's something that affects a lot of you, and a lot of you have spoken to me about. A lot of my clients have spoken to me about. We're talking about ADHD and sleep and the struggle with it that so many of us can have. Now, the weird thing about people that have ADHD and people that struggle to fall asleep, to stay asleep, to wake up early, the symptom of having trouble with sleeping is actually left out of the criteria of a diagnosis for ADHD because it's so subjective, and people can have so many other issues with sleep that aren't related to ADHD. However, it is one of the traits, and it is a thing that a lot of people struggle with alongside their ADHD. When I look back now, especially relating to sleep, I can see that I had a lot of these issues come up for me from being about the age of 13, which is going to be interesting when I get into some of the research, and it might hit home with a lot of you as well. So as always, I've spent this week nerding out on a lot of research, a lot of articles, a lot of podcasts, just so I can put together the best possible overview of why sleep is really hard for people with ADHD. Why do we struggle with it so much? But also what good sleep hygiene looks like and best practices for people with ADHD that need to get their sleep in. This may end up being 2 episodes because there is a lot for me to get through, but we'll see. We'll see how we go. Now, before I get into today's episode, it is the start of April, so we're into the second quarter of the year, and I have space to take 3 more people into Fuzz Culture Club, which is really exciting. Pretty much been full since January, but I've got some space coming up. And as I'm sure you know by now, if you listen to this podcast, I absolutely love working with all my trans and queer family on their fitness and nutrition. I love helping people discover fitness in a way that feels good for them and their body. I love to help people find bodily autonomy from movement and exercise and feeling strong and empowered. And I love to help people who have struggled with their food relationship find a bit more freedom and a bit more balance with it. So if you feel like Fuzz Culture Club could be your flavor, and if you're listening to this podcast, it absolutely will be your flavor, I'm sure of it. Fill in the form in the show notes and just tell me a little bit about yourself, and we can have a chat via email, or we can hop on a call. I won't make you get on the phone if you don't want to, and we'll see if you are a good fit for the team and if I can help you, because I will never bring someone into Fuzz Culture Club that I don't think will love the vibe of it and not get on with everyone else in the team. So this is your chance to get in on the April intake, and I would love to talk to you about that. All right, ADHD versus sleep. Let's get into it. I think for a lot of people with ADHD, we almost find sleep boring and counterproductive in a sense, despite the fact that we know that it is like crucial for executive function and our brain, our focus, and our long-term health. And when our sleep is affected and we're not getting a lot of it, sometimes we might actually feel fine when we're not riding off much sleep. But then often we might not be noticing the areas that we aren't fine. Things like our focus, our mood, how it affects our movement, our like decision-making skills and nutrition. And when we do notice, it may be too late and it's already quite negatively affecting us. And partly that can be because a lot of people with ADHD don't pay attention to things that aren't super stimulating. And it may be that our jobs or whatever we do during the day, studying, work, is so stimulating that we don't always notice our tiredness or lack of sleep, which I resonate with a lot because as soon as I wake up, my head is in Fuzz Culture Club always. So it's very easy for me to not notice. And I'm sure that plenty of other people that really immerse themselves in their jobs or their studies or something creative that they love, it's really easy to get lost in it and not realize the detriment that lack of sleep is having on you. And the other thing that may be different from someone that doesn't have ADHD is that we often feel like we need a good 3-4 hours to wind down before bed, but we're often also hesitant to want to go to sleep because that means that our day is done. And maybe there's a part of us that don't want to let our day go because we won't ever have that time again. And I was talking to a client this week, and they were saying how they really felt like when they finish work for the day, that's their time to do fun stuff. And that makes complete sense because a lot of people will work a job that they don't necessarily absolutely love, but it pays the bills, it serves them, it allows them to live the life they want outside of work. Their job is not their life. So if your job isn't necessarily stimulating you or super enjoyable, it might be that your evenings are your time, and going to bed and getting a decent night's sleep kind of almost gets in the way of that fun, stimulating dopamine hunting, you know? Now, when I was a kid, I barely slept. My main memories from being about 12 years old to being 20 was just constant insomnia, being awake all night. And I would often sit up and watch TV, or I would sit up and make music and hyper focus on songwriting and lyrics until I passed out. And as an adult, it's still so tempting for me to want to do that sometimes. But obviously, that's very counterproductive for me then having to wake up the next day and be a coach. And what I have found is I eventually became more of a morning person as I got older. I guess almost because I had to be, in a sense, especially when I stopped touring as much. So my days weren't from 11 a.m. to 4 a.m., which I was used to for years and years and years of touring. But what I did find was the structure of being a touring musician really worked for me. And since I've stopped touring, because they were long days, very physically active, very stimulating, very overwhelming sometimes, and very mentally draining, but in a really fulfilling way. So that structure of getting up at 11 a.m., going to a venue, doing the load-in, the sound check, the show, talking to people, selling merch, loading out, not really getting back to where we were staying until early hours in the morning and just passing out, that really worked for me. And since stopping touring as much, I have definitely found sleep a lot harder to navigate because I'm not stimulated in those same ways anymore. I'm not seeing a different place every day. I'm not traveling as much. I'm not having all these different things to stimulate me and almost mentally tire me out in a sense. So where I'm at now is I can now get up early despite having shit sleep, but I always feel like I need a good couple of hours before I have the capacity to start work, which at first when I became a coach, I would beat myself up for, because loads of coaches very commonly get up at 5 a.m. and start work immediately, but that just doesn't work for me. So the way I work things is now I often end up spreading my workout into the weekend if I can, because it works better. And as a result, during the week, I might work slightly shorter days with super long breaks to go to the gym or take dog walks. And that tends to help with how little sleep I sometimes get, because the long breaks I take to reset and to move improve my focus. But it's still not ideal. And I constantly have to work to try and improve my sleep. But I find it really, really hard. So if you're listening to this and you're struggling as well, I promise you it is not just you. And the other thing here is not everyone has the privilege of being in charge of their own schedule. So being able to choose your working hours as like a self-employed person is a huge privilege for anyone with ADHD and can definitely be a saving grace. So if you work flexi time or you work remotely or you're self-employed, this can actually really help, but not everyone is able to do that. But on the whole, for most of us with ADHD, being able to fall asleep in 20 minutes seems absolutely impossible. So we need different strategies and practices, and we don't always know what those are. And it's not necessarily going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. So it means that we have to do a little bit more work to figure out how we can improve our sleep and what works for us. So to begin with, I want to dive in to why people with ADHD actually struggle with sleep so much more than a lot of neurotypical people. Most research and experts seem to agree that the key problems with sleep in ADHD are due to a combination of things. So behavioral symptoms, physiological differences, and in some cases, those of us that are medicated, the side effects of those medications, especially the stimulants. And that doesn't mean, as people with ADHD, that we're completely fucked when it comes to sleep. But as I said before, it does mean that we probably have to work a little harder than the rest of the population to build a healthier sleep-wake cycle, because we naturally are going to find it harder. Now, there's no one single sleeping problem that affects people with ADHD. For most of us, we will just have increased nocturnal activity. I was like this as a kid. I still kind of am now. I think a lot of the reason for that is because the world is quieter at night. There's not as many distractions and things going on, so we feel like we can focus on things better. There is also a lot of research that found that short sleep duration is significantly linked to people with ADHD. Children with ADHD sleep less overall, and sleep disturbances associated with ADHD, they generally appear a bit later in life at around age 12 on average, which was interesting because that's definitely what happened for me. And it definitely makes sense as to why a lot of people go undiagnosed, because they're not necessarily noticing those patterns until they hit their teenage years. And at that point, everyone will just blame the not sleeping on being, a teenager going through puberty, hormones all over the place. Now, the main aspects of sleep that people with ADHD struggle with are falling asleep quickly. So 3/4 of people with ADHD struggle with this. Staying asleep, so feeling restless, having lots of racing thoughts, busy brain. Then also waking up on time. So 80% of people with ADHD have trouble waking up on time. As I said earlier, a lot of people struggle with going to bed on time, because linked to wanting to have lots of stimulating things going on after work, maybe hunting for a bit of dopamine and struggling to turn off. And then 75% of adults report that their minds restlessly move from like one concern to another for several hours until they finally fall asleep. And even then, they wake up a lot, they toss and turn a lot, and sometimes barely sleep at all. So 70% of adults with ADHD struggle with their sleep. You are absolutely not alone. I think the other thing that's definitely become clear is that sometimes lack of sleep doesn't feel like it affects us until we get older. And a lot of people say when they're in their late 20s, early 30s, they just don't feel like they can survive off little sleep anymore. It becomes more of a problem. And when we're younger, we definitely feel like we can run off little sleep and not necessarily feel that wrath of tiredness hit us the next day. For me, I could tour for months and rely on so little sleep and feel great every day. If I did that now as a 33-year-old, I would be fucked. And I think that's a combination of things. Firstly, as we grow up, we definitely notice it more. We pay more attention to our sleep. And that may be because we start to actually care about our long-term health more, but also because we're older, we might start to see a few health complications or issues start to arise as we've lived our life for longer, we've got older, and we start to notice things like that a lot more. And we are responsible for our health, as opposed to when we're a kid, we are very much dependent on someone to take care of us. So I have 6 of the reasons here why people with ADHD's sleep is impacted so much. So the first one is when we sleep, that involves neurotransmitters, and those transmitters are also the same ones that are implicated in someone with ADHD. And one of those is a neurotransmitter called GABA, and it's responsible for inhibition. And people with ADHD typically have less available GABA, which makes submitting to sleep a lot harder for us. So in simpler terms, we find it hard to submit to sleep because we have way more inhibition. We're not able to relax and we're very self-conscious typically. And then we have something called delayed sleep phase syndrome, so DSPS. So DSPS is a sleep disorder that affects our internal clock, and you might have heard of that referred to as our circadian rhythm. Now, people with this sleep disorder have sleep patterns that are delayed a few hours or more from what's considered as normal sleep patterns, in inverted commas, for anyone that's not watching on YouTube. So people with DSPS, they go to sleep later and they wake up later. And this makes it hard to wake up in time for work or for school. And DSPS is commonly seen in people with ADHD. Now, I read a hypothesis yesterday about people with ADHD from a researcher that was really interesting. And they said that the lack of an accurate circadian clock may also account for the difficulty that loads of ADHD people have in judging the passage of time. So it's basically saying that our internal clocks aren't really set like neurotypical people's are. And consequently, we only experience two different times. And one of those is now, and one of those is not now. And that's really interesting because I think that could definitely also be linked to the impulsiveness that a lot of ADHD people have, that now and that not now, like very black and white, one or the other. Then next up, we have a delay in the onset of melatonin. So for those who don't know what melatonin is, it's a hormone associated with sleep. And the delay in that melatonin being produced is another issue seen in people with ADHD. Then moving on from hormones, people with ADHD exhibit quite often a gene called COMT. Now, I'm not going to pronounce what that actually stands for because, oh my God, the word in front of me is so long. Catecholome methyltransferase. It could be, but don't quote me on that. But COMT. And what COMT does, it suppresses an enzyme that processes dopamine. And this makes it harder for our bodies to regulate sleep. And that's why we love to go dopamine hunting. And then the last why is that some people on ADHD meds are taking meds that are stimulants. So that's going to make it harder to sleep. And then when you eventually get to sleep, it's going to make it way harder to wake up. But some people with ADHD actually find that they sleep better with that stimulant and they find it easier to wake up. So just further proof that it's never going to be a one size fits all for everyone. So we've now established what we struggle with about sleep and why we are more prone to struggle with it. And I want to cover what good sleep hygiene actually looks like. Because if you are someone with ADHD that struggles with your sleep, there are a number of boxes that we can tick off and ensure that we're doing to give us the best chance of sleeping. And if we can't tick all those boxes, these are the things that we need to work on first. So the first one of these is having a consistent sleep and wake time. The evidence shows that regularity in sleep patterns with consistent bedtimes and wake up times, they're associated with better long-term health, better alertness, better cardiovascular and metabolic and mental health. So the perks of going to bed at the same time every day and waking up every day when you can are awesome. And having that consistent wake up time and bedtime, that in itself is more beneficial than just 8 random hours in bed. And the research here has shown that a regular 6 hours a night in bed consistently was actually a better indicator of health than a really erratic 8 hours. The other perks of having that consistent sleep wake time, it's better for our hunger regulation as well. And if you throw in eating at consistent times and eating regular meals throughout the day, those hand in hand can be really energy giving, can regulate your sleep, can regulate your hunger. So pluses on all sides of things from that way. And one thing that people often ignore is the difference between their weekday and their weekend sleeping hours. Now, this isn't just an ADHD thing. Everyone thinks that they might want to lie in on a weekend. And if you've accrued loads of sleep debt over the week, there's not actually much benefit to laying in and catching up on sleep. You're better just getting up and going to bed at the same time. Obviously, if you're going on a night out or you have social events, your sleep pattern is going to change. But for the most part, if you can wake up at the same time every single day, you're winning. Now, the second measure of sleep hygiene is going to be the environment that you sleep in. You want to think about things of the temperature of your room. Do you have a preference with pillows? Is your room dark enough? If it isn't, do you have a sleep mask? Are you going to limit the amount of screens that you have in your room? The environment that we sleep in counts for everything. And there's a lot of little things that we can do to help regulate that for us. And then next up, we have a good wind down routine after you've finished your day. So this is something that we really pay a lot of attention to in Fuzz Culture Club when people are struggling with their sleep. We think about what their wind down looks like. And this is especially significant in people with ADHD because getting ourselves in the headspace of going to bed is something that we struggle with. So thinking about like, what does your chill time look like? Is there something that you like doing? Are you going to watch a bit of TV? Do you exercise? Do you do something creative? And then thinking about almost a stack of habits that help you wind down for the day. like journaling, reading, getting a shower or a bath, having some quiet time. What does that wind down look like for you? And if you're doing that consistently, your mind is going to get in the mood that it knows it's going to go to bed. Then the last couple of things we need to consider to have good sleep hygiene, thinking about caffeine cutoff points. If you are significantly impacted by caffeine and you are drinking caffeine late into the afternoon, that means with the half-life, that caffeine is still going to be in your system later in the day. So you might actually find that you sleep better cutting it off at a certain point of the day, 12 p.m., 1 p.m. However, some people find that it doesn't necessarily affect them at all. So this is something that you'd want to experiment with a bit more. We maybe need to assess our napping. If you are a napper, a person that naps, and you rely on taking naps, maybe because of your work or because of how tired you feel, experiment with them and see if they're impacting your ability to fall asleep. And if you remove those naps, is it helping you sleep better? And if the answer is yes, the naps might have to do one for now. And then the last thing to consider with sleep hygiene is, do you have any other sleep issues? Do you have sleep apnea? And do you need a machine for that, or do you need to pursue treatment for that? Do you sleepwalk? Do you have night terrors? Things like that. These are all considerations when you're thinking about sleep hygiene. So consistent sleep-wake time, a good sleep environment, a good wind down routine, a caffeine cutoff time, and nap management. If you have every single one of these things in check and you are still not sleeping, it might be that we then need a bit of trial and error and some techers to actually find some sleep practice that works for you after doing all this stuff, if it's not enough. So that was quite a lot to take in. We've gone through which parts of sleep we struggle with. We've gone through why people with ADHD are more prone to sleep issues, and we've gone through what good sleep hygiene looks like. That is a whole bunch of info for you to take in right now. So I'm going to end this episode here as a part 1. So in part 2, we're going to go through best practices for ADHDers that need their sleep, that have good sleep hygiene but are still struggling. And we're also going to go through a formula that can help people with ADHD, and to be fair, neurotypical people as well, wind down and try and get themselves in the best possible place to have a good sleep. So I hope you found this helpful as a part 1 on ADHD and sleep so far. As always, any questions, shoot me a DM on Instagram. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop them in the comments. And next episode, we're actually going to get a bit deeper into coping mechanisms that could help us. If you are listening or watching this podcast and you haven't followed or subscribed to it, I would absolutely love it if you could do that. Helps the podcast grow, helps get it to more people, which is exactly what we want. So have an awesome rest of your week. Take it easy. That's me out. Bye.